The entire reason we have the ability to predict and to some degree influence female nature is because of their strong affinity and shameless attraction to validation. Validation for women is like a carrot on a stick to a horse. So understanding how validation works, becoming a source of validation, and how to correctly distribute it is paramount. Today I'm going to be teaching you the science of validation itself. I'm essentially going to be teaching you how to use validation to keep your status higher in relation to the girls, and how to use it correctly so that you don't end up hurting yourself in the process. Because validation in itself is a double-edged sword. The very first thing you need to know about validation is that it's impossible to give validation if you don't first become a source of validation. And to keep it very simple, all you need to do to become a source of validation is to demonstrate that you don't give your validation out too easily. Another way to say it is, you must demonstrate that you require work and effort for your validation. You're not just out here giving validation for free, you're actually getting compliance in return. Now, in order to not give validation away for free, you actually have to know what validation looks like. A simple definition I can give you for validation is the recognition and acknowledgement of value. Basically, anything you do or say that communicates to the woman that you find value in her is validating her. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what are those things you find yourself being inspired to do whenever you find yourself in front of a woman that you yourself consider having high value? It can be anything obvious and overt like a compliment. Compliments, by the way, being the most popular form of the acknowledgement of value. Or it could be something as indirect and impersonable as being nervous around her. Because your nervousness around her is an indirect acknowledgement that she holds higher value than you. Oh, and by the way, that's where nervousness comes from. It's an internal fear of fucking up the process of trying to extract value from someone else. You're nervous in front of that person because you're terrified you might make a mistake in front of them. But I digress. So coming back full circle, the entire point and process to becoming a source of validation is taking note of and making sure that you're not leaking validation as you go. Unfortunately for most men, we are trained to lead with validation. That's what people call simps these days. For these type of men, validation is a knee-jerk reaction that they just can't stop. So if you really think about it, becoming a source of validation comes down to your own mindfulness and discipline. Now note, I'm not saying to withhold validation indefinitely. I'm saying for you to withhold your validation until and unless you gain compliance first. If you never give your validation, then you're not really a source of it, are you? So think of your validation as a currency that you can cash in for compliance. Compliance, by the way, being the following of the orders that you give, to keep it simple. I know, following orders is a dramatic way to put it, but essentially compliance from a woman is anything she does to obey the instructions that you give. We'll talk about compliance some more later. A major thing you have to remember about validation is that every time you validate a woman, you're essentially giving her a piece of yourself. Your validation to her is the confirmation that you do find value in her, right? Which is why women are designed to take whatever you say as validation towards them at face value. Even when you don't truly mean to validate them, they will believe you. Because why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they want to believe that you really do see value in them? This presents a unique problem to you because that means anything you say, even by accident, that slightly validates women, can be taken as confirmation of value by them and give them the reason to not chase you anymore. Don't forget, validation is the tool we use to get women to chase us. Without women feeling the inherent need to be validated by us, we hold no power over them whatsoever. Validation is the primary tool we use in the operant conditioning of women. And if you give them too much of it up front, there's literally no reason to chase you anymore. I've said this once before, but women don't actually sleep with you because they like you or because they feel attracted to you. Those are only the secondary reasons. The main reason they sleep with you is because they want to feel validated by you. Sex, aka your hard dick, aka the ultimate confirmation of your sexual attraction for her, is the ultimate validation for her that she's chasing here. She wants to fuck you not just to find out if you find her sexually attractive, but because she wants to know that she is worthy of sex with a man of your caliber. Granted, that's not actually how it works, and most men of any caliber will fuck anything, but we don't need to tell women that. The next thing you need to know about validation is that it has to be in direct proportion to the compliance that you get. Yes, there is a compliance to validation ratio, and that ratio is 1-to-1. The validation itself not only has to be directed towards the compliance, as in having something to do with the compliance itself, but it also has to be in the same proportion and magnitude. For instance, let's say you ask a girl what her name is, and that in itself can be taken as a compliance test. You're asking for compliance. Because if you really think about it, what's your name is an instruction she can either choose to obey or not. Let's say for the sake of this example, she actually tells you her name. My name is Katya. Yeah, let's also assume you like Russian girls. Now that she's giving you compliance, aka she's obeyed your instruction, she's giving you her name, you can go ahead and reward that compliance. But remember, the reward has to have something to do with the compliance itself, and it has to match. So I'll give you 3 options, you tell me which one you think is the right answer. Option A, oh, Katya, where are you from? Option B, wow, Katya, you're such a gorgeous girl. Or option C, oh, Katya, that's actually a pretty name. Let's go through a quick process of elimination, shall we? It can't be option A, oh, Katya, where are you from? Because not only did you not reward the compliance you got, but you also tried to fire another compliance test on top of that. You're creating an uneven exchange of value, which makes you the needier party and which makes you the lower value person in the conversation. The second one, option B, oh wow, Katya, you're such a beautiful girl. It's better than option A because at least this time you're actually rewarding the compliance, but it's also not ideal because you're over-validating her. She gave you her name, you complimented her look. Not a 1-to-1 ratio there. But the third option, option C, whoa, Katya, that's a beautiful name. That's the correct answer there because not only did you reward the compliance, but the reward was specifically tailored to the compliance itself. Here's another example. This one's for when you're already in a relationship. It's a little bit more complex than the first example because we're moving away from just verbal compliance and validation, but let's see if you can keep up. Your girl goes out of her way to plan the perfect evening for you, complete with all the people you want there and all the activities you like. How do you reward this level of compliance? And I'll give you a clue, it can't just be verbal. Because again, following rule number 1, the validation has to match the compliance. So what do you do to reward her for this level of proactivity? Is it A, ask her to marry you? Is it B, plan an evening for her in return? Or is it C, spend one-on-one quality time with her? Tell me in the comments what you think the answer is and why. I'm not going to be telling you right now. This is going to be your own homework to do. I'm just like your evil math teacher from back in high school. I'm going to give you an easy example and difficult homework. But not to worry, as we go on with this validation breakdown, you'll figure out the answer. Next thing you need to know about validation is its different levels. I don't think it takes a genius to understand that kissing her on the forehead is entirely different than buying her a car. Those are 2 different levels of validation. So it's not really the different levels of validation you need to understand here, but really how to use them correctly, or even more specifically, how to set them correctly. Let me explain. You see, as the man, it's your job to determine the way the relationship dynamic is set. The rhythm, the timing, the frequency, the distribution of validation, everything, including what the exchange rate on validation to compliance is. Yes, you get to determine that ultimately. Just like the free market gets to decide if that gallon of milk should be $3 or $6, you get to decide if 3 hours of your personal time and presence is worth 1 week of her obsessing over you. Or if her cooking you a nice home-cooked meal deserves just 1 round of good dick or 2. Or if her introducing you to her parents even warrants you introducing her to yours. You get what I'm saying? You get to make the rules up however you want, and you get to make them as lopsided as you want as well. And for the most part, you want her being the one investing more in the relationship anyway. So you do want to some degree to create these mismatches. Not saying the goal is to completely swindle her of her effort, but your time and energy has to have a higher value placed on it than hers. When it comes to validation, especially in the case of a relationship, you have to focus more on quality than quantity, impact over length of time. Distributing your validation like that is what guarantees that even though you're essentially doing the exact same thing every other guy is doing, she's still gonna see what you're doing. Your validation is infinitely more valuable. Yeah, she may have 1,000 guys like her Instagram post, but she's scrolling through all those likes to find that one guy. That one guy whose single like is worth 1,000 likes. The way you become that guy is to use scarcity to place higher value on what it is you do. And part of scarcity isn't just what we talked about in the beginning, which is withholding validation itself, but also the art of trickling it down as opposed to just baptizing them in it. When it comes to validation especially, less will always be more. And the last thing you need to know about validation is that there's things you can't directly validate, or more specifically, there's things you have to indirectly validate. Those are mutually benefiting things, the things that simultaneously benefit both you and her. A great example of that being sex. This might shock you to find out, but you should actually be very careful how you validate your woman sexually. From now on, as far as you know, you validate sex not by complimenting her sexually. You talk specifically about how good it was for you, and that's it. And to be honest, you might want to sprinkle in some constructive criticism while you're at it. A lot of men are way too quick to shower women with validation whenever they get naked with them. And the irony is that women do not appreciate men that are easy to please, especially in the bedroom. Learn to give vague answers about how much you enjoyed yourself whenever she asks you. Unless, of course, it was genuinely mind-blowing, in which case she most likely put a lot of effort into it. To be fair though, for most men, any sex is mind-blowing sex, so stick to the first rule. Please remember that it's impossible to validate correctly if you don't first devalidate to some degree. Giving her a compliment like you really know how to use your mouth, for instance, is only truly validating if you had told her in a previous occasion that she was lacking in that department. Just something to keep in mind. So there you have it, all the most important things you need to know about validation. I'm sure you'll be walking out into the world and noticing all the different little mistakes you were making before and making massive adjustments. You might have trouble applying and remembering all these rules at the same time, but eventually you'll get used to it. It's been Jace, your favorite scientist, and do with this information what you must.